Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now Anthony Joshua done a FaceTime with Josh Warrington, and obviously Anthony Joshua knows what it's like to go through a loss and have to try and come back. We do know that Josh Warrington is going to go for this rematch with Maurizio Lara. There are going to be things that he has to change though in the rematch. Sometimes though it's not huge things, it comes down to fine margins, and I believe that Josh Warrington can get the win. I mean, you can take his last performance and think that how does he beat someone like Lara, because it seemed like Lara was all wrong for him, but then again people said the same thing about Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. So of course there is a way in which he can get the victory. Josh Warrington also posted on Twitter saying boxing school with Anthony Joshua, lesson 1, bouncing back after getting KO'd by a Mexican. Thanks for the call, big man. Now, as we know, Anthony Joshua has been in this situation himself when he lost to Andy Ruiz. He lost his world titles, whereas Josh Warrington had vacated his title before, but still, it is a big defeat considering he was expected to win, and sometimes that can be the undoing of the fighter in the position of Josh Warrington or Anthony Joshua, because they are expected to win. The other guy is expected to be almost like a stepping stone to get to the next point, just to keep busy in some ways. I mean, Andy Ruiz was a late replacement for Anthony Joshua when he was supposed to be fighting a Jarrell Miller, and he wanted to be fighting a Deontay Wilder and a Tyson Fury, these big fights. Similar situation with Josh Warrington. He wanted the big fights. He even vacated his world title so he could go and chase those big fights, the fights that he wanted, instead of facing mandatory challengers. So he was in the same kind of boat as Anthony Joshua, but now all that matters is he beats Lara in the rematch. Now, there are many ways in which he can do that. I believe that he needs to change a few things here and there. It's not a huge gap because in these kind of fights it can be fine margins, and I do believe that Josh Warrington started too slow. He was almost looking to box more than mixing it up, although when he did get involved he was in there with a fighter who was going down to the body and throwing vicious hooks. He can punch hard, this guy. I mean, we've seen how hard he can punch in there with Josh Warrington, but there was nothing really that Josh Warrington was doing to thwart that success. That is something he's going to have to work on. Something that is already there with Josh Warrington, but he will have to actually use it in the second fight. Now, he wasn't really throwing many jabs. Josh Warrington needs to get that jab out there because against a Mexican fighter like that, when they get close, he's going to have the better of it. That's what we saw in there, going to the body, those hooks as well. And Warrington wasn't necessarily moving his head or being that elusive. He was getting caught with too many hooks. Same reason with Anthony Joshua, getting caught with too many hooks. So he does want to create that distance, but not necessarily boxing off the back foot, because Warrington isn't necessarily that kind of fighter. What he does need to do though is get that jab flowing, create that distance. Everything must come off that jab. He must start with it and he must finish with it, because what that does is creates the distance and mix it up as well. Go down to the body. And Josh Warrington can land those straight shots because it comes straight, whereas a hook, obviously, Lara has to be closer to Josh Warrington to land those hooks. If he doesn't let him get that close, then he is able to keep him at range and avoid those hooks. So he doesn't want to box him off the back foot, but he wants to stick in that mid-range. That is where Josh Warrington had some good success. Up close, he wasn't getting much success at all. When it was a long range, he managed to close the distance on Josh Warrington way too easily. I mean, Lara had an incredible performance. He was fast on his feet, he had good hand speed, he had good punch variation as well, going to the head and going to the body. He really broke Josh Warrington down, and those are things that Warrington cannot allow to happen. It is going to be an extremely tough fight. I mean, all Mexican fighters that seem to bring it, they seem to know how to find a way to make it really uncomfortable for their opponent. We saw that with Andy Ruiz and Anthony Joshua. We saw that also repeated, well, not repeated because it's a lot lower weight class, but still, we saw that kind of emulated in the fact that Josh Warrington was someone who was considered to be the best in the division, but still, this young fighter coming over from Mexico was able to give him all the problems in the world. And if we look at what Josh Warrington is able to do, if we look at his best performances, the Carl Frampton fights, the Lee Selby fights, and even the Kid Galahad fight, which did come a lot closer than the first two, but if you look at those fights, he was able to win just because he just wouldn't stop. He wasn't necessarily the technically better boxer than any of those fighters, but he just wanted to win more. He wanted to engage. He was there to fight. And in this fight with Maurizio Lara, I don't think that was necessarily there, because in the fights with Carl Frampton, he was probably the underdog against Lee Selby, most likely the underdog, and Kid Galahad, I guess it was kind of even. So he was constantly in this position where he had to perform out of his skin, and those kind of opponents forced that reaction from him. So when he goes and fights at someone like Lara, who isn't considered to be a threat to him, and he actually is, that can be a recipe for disaster because he's going in there thinking, this guy, I'll just beat him and then move on. But he doesn't get that kind of guy, so he's in there with that kind of mindset, and the other guy's in there thinking, I can beat this guy, I've got the style to do it, and that's what he done. The question I believe that we can ask is, if this was a unification fight, if this was for another world title and Lara wasn't made out necessarily to be a guy to beat to get to the next stage, just to almost to keep busy in some ways. I mean, it was supposed to be a tough fight. That is why Eddie Hearn put the fight on. He said that during this current climate, there can be no gimme fights. So it was always supposed to be a tough fight and one for the fans. But it was never supposed to be this kind of fight that Josh Warrington was going to lose. So when you consider that, what happens if this had been a unification fight? Would we have gotten a different performance from Josh Warrington? I believe absolutely yes. Would it have been a different result? Well, I guess that relies on what happens in the rematch. If we see what happens in the rematch where this is the big fight now, where this is the defining moment for Josh Warrington, where his career can go either way, whether it can go towards a stage where he has to rebuild and take a few lower level oppositions and start building his way back up, or whether he's back in the big time, like Anthony Joshua was when he got the revenge over Andy Ruiz Jr. So once we've seen that fight where he is motivated, then we can see, just the same as AJ versus Ruiz, was it just because Ruiz was better, or was it because Anthony Joshua kind of underestimated him and realistically wanted to be fighting at Jarrell Miller, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury? Those are big fights that excited him. Then he got Ruiz, but Ruiz was a lot better than anyone gave him credit for. I mean, many people did give him credit, but he was even better than that again. So it was kind of like Anthony Joshua was a below par performance, or not really on the gas. I mean, he was winning the fight, but he rushed in it too quickly, shown his immaturity in that fight, and he paid the price. This time around, the same questions will be asked of Josh Warrington, but we will only see the answers to those questions when we see what performance he gives in the rematch, because then we can judge it, then we can see, okay, Josh Warrington wasn't necessarily his best, or didn't necessarily have the mindset he needed to go in and beat this guy last time around. That will be very interesting to see the answer to that question. The thing that Josh Warrington can do in the rematch, if he is able to do it, is what Anthony Joshua done to Ruiz, which is take away all of his strengths. Ruiz has fast hands but slow feet, so AJ kept him at range, didn't allow him to get close and land those combinations and hooks, and work down to the body as well. So taking those strengths away and moving a lot, whereas Ruiz couldn't move as fast as Anthony Joshua, he couldn't pin him down. So it doesn't necessarily require Josh Warrington to follow Anthony Joshua's game plan to beat Ruiz, because obviously Lara is a completely different fighter and different opponent to Ruiz, but the skills can be extrapolated because what he can do is take the strengths away. So he doesn't need to follow the game plan of Anthony Joshua, he needs to find his own, but it needs to be to take away the strengths of Maurizio Lara, take away those hooks and body shots, move his head a lot more. There are many things he can do to take those things away and exploit the weaknesses of Maurizio Lara. Let's see him do it in the rematch. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.